Hello and welcome to Dale's Gaming, and this is a turbulent and stormy designer because the next ship I want to build is gonna have to fight in this more turbulent weather conditions. And something I noticed in the battles is that the waves and the weather does affect various elements of combat. So you do need to take that into effect. One, missiles, if they hit a wave, they go all squirrely and end up in the water. So, you know, you have to watch out for, if you've got low sea skimming missiles, they come into one of these large waves and they will get caught. So that's one. Also torpedoes as well, if they come out of the water on these, they can get, should we say, they lose balance. Basically it's where the fins are. I've ended up moving the fins to the centre of the torpedo to stop them tumbling, but that's something we'll see what happens with the next missile update. Shells as well. I'm pretty sure that shells, when they're hitting the water, seem to be, or the waves, they seem to be bouncing or skimming. So that's another effect of low high velocity rounds. They just didn't seem to be always hitting as expected. So that all taken into effect. The intention is to build a nice big ship to take on the Onyx Watch using what we have learned in the preceding campaign videos with the bad weather, big ships, and that damn Eerie. So we will be looking for something which can kill an Eerie. The primary is to go. I'm looking at first is lots of big guns. So we will be progressing through our historical ships, and we'll talk about the design, the aesthetics in a bit, and the history. But we'll be looking at a sort of Dreadnought, HMS Dreadnought style of ship, not 100%, but that type of design. Not a full modern battleship, but still the Dreadnought. So before we get into that, some of the elements I'm looking at including, I thought I would go through some items which people had asked about and they sometimes don't see in when I'm doing the build video. So first of all, guns. Now I'm happy-ish at the moment with the 348mm main guns we have at the moment. They could be a bit let's just bring up the view. They could be a little bit more accurate, but we're now going to go for volume of fire and saturate an area. I've reworked the loading situation with some clips and some loaders to vary the to get a more sustained fire rate than we had in the previous or the current Halsey version of the gun. These will be dual guns. I've only got one here, but they will be dual, firing roughly the cooldown of 2.5, so that's okay. Now the Dreadnought won't have many secondary guns. It will just have some small secondary, but lots of them, small 120mm. That's in keeping with the history but of the gun. Now I've been looking at these shielded style and with a loader and a more just auto fed straight into the firing piece, and because of historical I might go with these. Although these are more protected, I might go with these because I can fit more of them in for the value, and they look reasonable, and they actually are in keeping because the secondary guns on the Dreadnought were not shielded. They were just open, just like this. So but we won't have a nice blowy uppy ammo clip. I think I will leave that off. And the shells for these, just to go through, the secondary shell will just be a shape charge. I'm going to have a go at a shape charge EMP on those, primarily to try and get inside something like an Eerie or other and do some damage inside, and the EMP to take out the surface lambs and and other systems, see how that works. And the main will be similar to what I've used before, a squash head EMP. Now this is quite a slow shell, not as long a range slightly, because engagement ranges, I've noticed the engagement range we're mainly coming at them is about 1500, 2000 meters, somewhere in that region. And something I noticed because of the waves is the higher velocity shells were hitting the waves and then getting deflected, whereas this will arc them in a little bit better onto the target and hopefully maybe get a few more hits downwards on the surface of the ships rather than trying to go through the main belt armour. Certainly at longer ranges it will arc the shell in. So talking about armour of the enemy, this is another bit I hadn't really shown properly, is armour that I'm going to be looking at for this ship. So we've got the belt armour, so we're doing like a hybrid, slightly ablative mixed armour value. So from the outside we will have some shields, reflective shields. Now this is not very powerful, it is purely to try and stop small APS and trigger any inertial fuses away from the hull, and it will be the main power usage for the ship, but we'll only turn it on when we start taking damage, I think. So when we're not being hit, the shields will be off, but when we start taking hits, the shields will go on, or they'll go to full power. I'll look at some options on that, but the actual main armour will be a slope on the outside to take advantage of the new slope mechanics, a wooden beam just as an ablative, so if they get through there this will take up just plenty of health and can get repaired fairly easily. Then we've got two metal beams, and they're done with a little bit of Tetris just to reduce the chance of it going through any one block or taking out a whole system. So we've got vertical, horizontal, vertical, or that would be vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal. There we go. So there, and then we have an air gap, and then you're into your citadel, which again has an ablative on the outside for any spalling, and then a metal on the inside for the main citadel armour. And then because we're getting a lot of plunging fire, we need an armoured deck. So the main deck will be a metal with a wood underneath it. I've debated that, and I might change that around the other way so it's wood and then metal, but I think the metal will get a better chance of a bounce, so I might leave it that way round. We'll see how it goes. And on the turrets we'll have near the turret ring we'll have an extra layer of metal, and then the turrets themselves will potentially be just 2 or 3 layers of metal just to stop them being taken out. So that's the armour. Again, there will be a above small low strength shield to get some bounces, and also just to, as I say, trigger the inertial fuses and APSs. So this is because of producing a lot of power. I'm thinking about 6,000-7,000 power for shields and ammo, etc. So next we've got the power sources. Now lots of debate I'd obviously had before the video about steam versus fuel engines, and I'm going to put a steam engine in this ship, and that's just purely for historical reasons, not actually for main power. It is still fairly dense, i.e. it's power dense, and I might use it just as an emergency power source if fuels run out, or maybe these engines have got damaged, etc. So we've got 3 types of engines. Now I'm going to turn on, so excuse any noise whilst these go up to full power. So I looked at 3 types of engine we could put in. Well, first is the what I call the diesel. It's the low revs but lots of superchargers. Now we don't get much power for this, 540, so at 540 power usage, which could be at a, what should we call that, cruising speed. It's got 300 power per fuel, which is not great, but if we put it up to 100, you can see it goes down, so we don't want it revving up, so we put it down to 0.3. Seems to be a good potential speed for 500, but for 500 that's a fair bit of space. Next you've got, this is my rotary sort of inline turbo. It's efficient but not overly so, but it's more power dense, so running at the same sort of size but 100%, we got 312, similar sort of power per fuel, but it's producing 2400, so that's nearly 5 times as much power for what's it, maybe about twice the density potentially. And if you make this bigger, it will get more efficient because the inline turbos will work. People say, oh yeah, but that's not very efficient. I've heard it. Yes, if you can make more efficient, so this is a more efficient engine, but you can see the size of it, and this is only producing 1000 power, but it is at 2300 power per fuel, and if I make that bigger, that will get more efficient. I could either put blocks below it, etc. So that is a nice efficient, but you can see the size of it, it's what, 3 times the size of this one, but it's only producing a third of the power, a little bit more than a third, yeah, say 2.5, 40% of the power roughly. So yeah, this is the most efficient engine. One problem is if this does go down, like you only want 500 power, I think it's still quite, you can see that the efficiency goes down quite a lot. This one is still okay. If this only needs 500 power, let's see, it's about 500. Power per fuel is 190. That's not great, but okay. So anyway, I'll be mixing up a little bit of these engines. I don't think I'll put the hyper efficient one in there. I don't think that's going to be needed. It's going to take up too much room in the ship. I think I'll mainly use this one as the main power creator for when shields are needed. We'll have something like this as just our cruising engine. So this is just produces 500 power, up to 500 power, relatively space efficiency, and relatively fuel efficient, using fuel for that type of power. And then the steam engine will only kick in, so this is at full, but it can produce, let's see, we're up to about 4,500 with just 2 boilers. So this produces a lot of emergency power if needed. So because the batteries have gone, and these are controlled, so the boiler only cuts in if the batteries have been used, and then it cuts them off again when the battery's up again. So it just keeps the battery between 50 and 90%. So this battery, for instance, is pushing out 3,500 power, and this is pushing out 5,000 power. So we are charging the batteries up effectively at the same time as producing enough power to do that. So anyway, that's going to be the power system. So on with the main build, and I've just put this into a normal sort of weather, just so I can see a little easier, and we haven't got so much movement of the ship whilst I am building it, which would be a little bit annoying. So first of all, we're doing it. You can skip here, look for the time code for if you just want to go to the results, but otherwise we'll be going through the build of the ship. Now, design wise, what I have been thinking about is the HMS Dreadnought, and some of the elements of the Dreadnought we're going to take into this ship to allow for the big guns. It was a natural progression from the earlier ships which were basically a mixed version of guns, for want of a better word. By that I mean that the Nelson, which was actually it was the Nelson class prior to the Dreadnought, they had 4 12-inch guns, and I think it was about 10 9.2-inch guns, and then some 3-inch guns and some 2-inch guns. It had quite a range of guns. Now the Dreadnought was effectively what made it different. It was the first ship that had 10 12-inch guns and just a load of 12-pounders for secondaries. Did have some torpedoes, but I'm going to ignore those because they were useless. So that was its main difference. Now, why did they move to this particular type of gun layout? There's a few, I would say, competing reasons that people have said why this happened, but mainly I think it was because of ranges, in that prior to the Dreadnought, the naval people still thought the strategy would be that the ships would sail in line and get close. They would start out at quite a long range, but the main engagement range they were predicting would be only around fairly close range, 4,000 meters, etc. And so the medium-sized guns would, the medium secondary guns would still be in range and be able to do damage to the surface, etc., while the main guns blast away at the hull, etc. So there was the ability to have lots of guns, but the battles in Russia, in the Russia-Japanese War, showed that ranges were expanding out quite considerably, and the later 12-inch guns were effectively, with the better fire control, were capable of going out to about 16,000 yards. What's that, about yards to meters? I don't know what that is. It's about 1,500 meters. Yeah, sorry, 15,000 meters. Anyway, long ranges. So there was no point. These small guns were just, they were not going to be effective at those ranges. They would have to either overpower them to make them go at that range, and or increase the caliber. So that's effectively what they did. There was talk about that it was difficult to spot the fall of shot between the big guns and the medium guns, but there's some other people saying no, that wasn't really an issue between the guns. The fall of shot, it's at this time they were more using directors, and they could tell the difference between the shot elements, but it may have been an issue. Other little bits which were unique, I say unique starting points for HMS Dreadnought: fire control. The guns were directed from a central point on the main mast, and it was one of the first battleships to have electrical connection between the fire control and the turrets, rather than using the old voice pipes. So they were able to electrically communicate the lay of the guns from the controller, from the fire control turret. So that was a new unusual bit, and they had very good fire control that was able to go out to quite a long range compared to the previous versions, which were still expecting to only fight at 4,000 or 5,000 yards. It had now 10,000, 12,000 yard capable fire control. Other bit which I am gonna, one of the reasons I'm keeping the steam in, is that HMS Dreadnought had a lot of power. It moved from the reciprocal piston steam engines to these turbines. Now, in game, the turbines don't work the same as they do in the ship's reality. The turbines were driving the shaft directly, whereas in game they only power up batteries. But I'm going to keep them in. There was talk about having steam powered propellers in a upcoming patch, so I'm going to leave them in. Just if that comes off, we'll see what happens, but for the moment I'm going to use them as again with batteries, just to see what happens. I don't like the fact that they're so inefficient. I wish I could burn oil on them. That would be a nice little upgrade for them. Anyway, we're going to use some steam engines. So the HMS Dreadnought had these turbines which pushed the speed up considerably. Trying to remember now, I think it was around 21, 23 knots. So I can't remember which one of those it was. Whereas previous ships were down at the 15, 18 knots. Now, why is that important? By having speed, you can dictate the range of the engagement. So now it's got all of these just big guns, and it can say, I only want to fight at, say, 10,000 yards, which means, and if the enemy tries to close in, you can pull away and keep the range at 10,000, whereas they'd always be trying to close up to their new range. So it was the combination of the faster speed from the turbines and the bigger guns worked together. On their own, neither were effective. You needed the speed to dictate range and the guns. There was unfortunately some American ships which had all the guns but didn't have the speed, which means yes, they could fire at long range, but they couldn't dictate the range of the engagement, in that the faster vessels would just pull away from them if they wanted to, or close in to a closer range where their guns were more effective. So it didn't work as such, ideally. I think that was the South Carolina, I think, or it was their earlier dreadnoughts. They're all right. One other bit as well, just as a quick bit when it comes to the guns, is the Dreadnought used wing turrets, which I will use. I might even mix it slightly different using the Hegoland octagonal version, so it's got multiple wing turrets on each side, but I'll see what size we get to. But they used wing turrets. They didn't go to super firing, i.e. guns firing above the another turret, for about 4 or 5 years. One of the reasons was they persisted with a sighting hood which was on top of the turret, and they were worried that the blast from the guns firing above another turret would damage the sighting hoods and therefore render the gun unable to sight it in. And it took them many years to decide, no, A, it wouldn't damage it, and B, move the bloody sighting turrets into the front of the turret rather than on the top, because it didn't really matter too much, because you're laying from the fire control. But the Royal Navy took a while to make that change, and a lot of other navies as well. It wasn't just the Royal Navy, the German Navy as well took a while to move to super firing. The Americans actually moved fairly quickly to super firing, although they did take a while to start creating dreadnoughts. Anyway, back to the build. And welcome back to the just about completed dreadnought. It needs a bit of a lick of a paint, but generally it is ready, I think. Still having some problems with the AI in general, I'll say that now, but taking manual control is okay. Now, this has ended up a bit bigger than expected. I was hoping for something around 200,000, I think was the size I was aiming at, and it's ended up at 284. Some of that is fuel. It's got quite a lot of fuel on board, and if I reduce the fuel, that would actually reduce the cost of it quite considerably. That fuel is very expensive, so yeah, potentially it could be cheaper. A quick little walk around for those that didn't watch video, or some areas I didn't put in the videos. I've ended up with 7 turrets. I've taken a bit of a hybrid between the Dreadnought with the wing turrets and the German Dreadnoughts with the multiple wing turrets. So we've got a good 14 guns with 10 on the broadside and 3 front or rear. So it's got quite a good broadside hit with those 348mm guns, and you can see there's quite a lot of these little secondaries. There's actually ended up, I think it's about 34 secondaries. Now the actual Dreadnought, I think, had 28 secondary guns dotted around. They did change over time, but that was sort of in keeping. They're only 120mm, but they're quite good little shape charge EMP. I've even put some little spotlight turrets on there, which if something gets in close, it does actually work with the spotlight, which is quite interesting. Talking about spotting, there's two AIs on the ship. There is the primary and the secondaries. The spotting is done by on top of these masts is the primary. So this is the primary number one, with a backup facility on top of the bridge, and at the back is the secondaries with also a backup for the primaries as well. So between the two of them, we've got two areas it would have to take out, and the secondary AI is down here somewhere. I'm sure I put it down here somewhere. Pretty sure it's down in this area. There we are. Secondary AI just down in here. It's only got some priorities. It prioritizes small vehicles rather than large vehicles, which the primary AI. The primary AI is down below the bridge, right at the very bottom. Here we are. And it is set up, the navigation, let me just go into this mode so I can see a little bit easier. Where are we? I think that's one. So navigation has been set up, but it seems to just do whatever it wants to do. I want to keep it around the 2000 to 2500 mark, because that's my battlefield view area, but it seems to just decide to close at times and go weird. Now I don't know whether it's to do with detection, and it loses detection of the vessel, but it does it intermittently. Sometimes you take the ship out and it's perfectly fine. Anyway, that's those. The power systems I ended up putting in, if we go down the stairs, most of these stairs, we do have it fully walkable. But the systems we've got, where are we? Here we go. Right, so we have the cruising engine here, which is set to start up fairly quickly, but only provides about 700 power. But that's reasonably enough to manage the normal cruising speed. Then we do have our resource area with fuel and resources. Onwards past one of the that would be the, I think that'd be X turret. Then we've got the primary engine. Let's go down here. This is the power engine, which is the rotary inline turbo engine. It's got a reasonable when it's running at 100%. At the moment it's running almost nothing. Capability of 4,800, which is good, and at that it does actually get up to about 300 or so power per fuel, which is good, reasonable for that size engine. And then we do have a steam engine as well, just to back everything up if anything needs doing, and that is, I think that's just down the front here. Just got to remember where I put that. No, that was that one. Where's the steam engine gone? Oh, there's the steam engine, just the other side there. So it's just a small steam engine, which at the moment is not on. I don't think it will be on at this moment. Yep, it's not on because the AIs have, the control block has turned it off because there's nothing in range, and the batteries are fully charged. So that's those areas. There's lots of gaps on this to allow it to be upgraded. We've got a whole area along the side between the wing turrets. and some areas in the center could be repurposed, and there's a lot of area in the front as well which I haven't used, so we've got room to upgrade this significantly to add new systems, but I want to do it as the original design, which is just going in with the big guns. Now I have tested it against an Erie and it did win. Took a little bit of time, but the Erie didn't disable it. It took out some of the guns as expected, but there was enough turrets, enough guns and enough repairability that it managed to take the Erie out, and the secondaries managed to help remove some of the surface LAM systems, etc., once it was in range. So I'm gonna first of all make the weather a little bit more stormy. So we've got a bit of a storm brewing up now with some decent waves, which will mean that the ship has to allow for the wave, and shots may get caught up in the wave. So this is a good sort of test for the environment it's going to be fighting in. We'll bring it in against something reasonable. We'll try an Alcazar, which is yeah, we get a few of those coming in and they are quite powerful, and we'll try the Constitution as well, just to see how it does against those types of ships. So this is actually quite a... I'm going to turn the UI on so I can see what's happening. Okay, they're over there. Let's see what happened. Now at the moment, again, it is turning around, but you can see it's just going straight for the enemy. It's not... although it may be when it gets within range it will change, but let's see how it's doing against the enemy. So the shots are coming in at a reasonably high arc, which makes them less accurate in general, but they don't get caught up in the water. The Constitution has got an anti-LAM system, so it'll be a good test whether it can get through the LAMs of that system. And we should have the Alcazars around somewhere, and here's the Alcazar. It's not firing at the Alcazar at the moment. It's going for the Constitution, who is the closer and nearer target. So it has done some damage, which is good, and because of the long time in the air, if you've got a ship which moves around a fair bit, then yes, it's gonna basically fire at the wrong spot. You can see it's getting a little closer now. This salvo should come in. Yep, we're getting some hits in now. So it's the armour weathered that shot from the Constitution quite nicely there. It's holding up against a full broadside, which is a good test of that armour against the crams, and now we've got a good amount of dakka full broadside going into the Constitution. So that should be... You can see at the closer range how the shots are getting hit, into the water and deflected on occasion. I may have picked a slightly too bigger ships. It's taking a while to slug it out, but this is what it's built for. It is built to slug it out with other big ships. That is what I designed it. So it's got good armour, good repairs, and a good broadside coming in with all of those weapons from the secondaries and the primaries. And the AI, for whatever reason, is deciding that a nice close range ram would be a good idea. I'm not so sure about that, but you know, I am thinking, is there a way of reproducing a lot of what the AI does with control blocks? Because at the moment, although it looks like it's actually still concentrating on the Constitution rather than the Alcazar, but the secondary guns have been taken out mostly on this side. But otherwise they would be firing in at the Alcazar. So it's now focusing on the Alcazar, and you can see the guns are coming in, applying that EMP damage and the good HESH damage from the hit and internal, and we are getting some internal hits from the secondaries with their heat ammo. I've set them to a fairly high penetration factor to try and get hits inside, and it works quite nicely. So it's taking out the Alcazar. So this is just taking out a Constitution and an Alcazar on its own. The Alcazar is just about done now. We're just finishing it off. I think that actually is dead because all the guns have turned off. Just about. Could be because of the angle. If the angle is too low, they stop firing, so they don't shoot themselves. Taking a bit of damage, but generally I'm happy with the ship. It is a brawler. It's surviving damage quite nicely, and it's dishing out damage over time against any enemy. So it's a true battleship style. It's not going to go in there and quickly kill. It'll wear it down with those the massed broadside. And close up like it is now at the moment, that's doing a fair bit of damage. Pity there's no secondaries left on this side, but a couple on the rear. I think most will be firing. Yep, they are firing as well. So we'll leave it just destroying what's left of that Alcazar. But any comments, please leave down below. This is a progression, not the ultimate. There's lots of things that could be better, but it's just a progression from the previous on to the next style, and then we'll move on again as well. I quite like it. As I say, a little bigger than expected, but hey, you know, that's the way it's quite a powerful ship here. So in the campaign, in the battles, this will be brought in and unlikely to have many other support ships with it. We'll most probably make a new fleet up, I think, based around this particular ship rather than upgrading the current ones, but we'll have a look on those. As always, click like if you think this is good or not, or let me know what other ships would be a good idea. But as always, keep playing the game and have fun.